This video will be concerned with trait theory. Trait theory exposes the idea that people are born with inherited traits. It exposes to what extent that is true or false. It looks into whether people are born with certain characteristics and whether these characteristics, for example, could lead to good leadership. So what are the traits of a good leader? And how can these be spotted in individuals, say, at an early stage? In other words, are some people born to be leaders? What are the traits of the good leader, and can we identify those in others? The trait theory of leadership is based on specific characteristics of many leaders. This method is mainly considered when predicting leadership effectiveness. So what the theorists have done, what the researchers have done, is looked at the characteristics of many leaders, look at their traits, their attitudes, their abilities, even their physical traits, whether they're tall or not so tall, or blue eyes, brown eyes, whatever. To look at all the traits to try and predict if there is some correlation between the traits and, let's say, leadership, since we're talking about leadership in this context. So it's collecting evidence by making observations of, in our case, a lot of leaders, selecting their characteristics and seeing which predominates. And if more leaders have brown eyes than blue eyes, does that mean brown-eyed leaders are better? And can we predict that the next set of leaders will have brown eyes? So it's an interesting approach to try and determine leadership. Many theorists who study leadership traits have identified characteristics that outline leader effectiveness. These characteristics include physiological, the size of the people, the demographics, their age, their gender, their characteristics as people, their personality, if they're quietly spoken, or if they're temperamental, or if they're quite a fiery personality, intellectual, if they're thoughtful and reflective and thinking, if they're task related, if they're orientated towards getting a particular job done and they can apply themselves and concentrate for a long period, or social, are they very sociable and outward looking and friendly and inclusive? So theorists have looked at individuals from all sorts of perspectives to try and work out what are the traits of let's say, leaders. What are their traits? What sort of people are they? To try and get a fix that they have got a certain set of characteristics which predominate, and let's say all leaders have got those. Studgill in 1974 outlined following traits and skills necessary to identify a leader. Now I'm just going to give you these. I'm not going to work my way through them because, as you can see, the list is quite extensive. Adapts to changing situations. Well, a good leader should be able to do that. Engaged with the social environment and activities. Ambitious individual who aims to achieve high and has got high self-confidence. Number 4, someone who is assertive. Someone who is cooperative. Number 6, decisive. I'm not going to go through the list, but you could see from the list that, generally speaking, these are desirable qualities for a leader. And the skills to achieve that will be that they should be intelligent, they should be creative, conceptually skilled, they're able to problem solve, they're able to look at situations from different angles. They should obviously be fluent in speaking and writing and have good communication skills. They should be knowledgeable about the particular job. Not just be intelligent in a general sense, but these should be knowledgeable about the skills necessary to complete a particular task and knowledgeable about the market in which they're operating. Since we're dealing with business studies, we should relate it to perhaps business leadership. They should be organized, persuasive, and so on. So what Stockdale did in 1974 was to set out the traits and the skills of leaders. But the list of traits and the list of skills, as you have seen, is quite long. If you go back to traits, it was 11 identified, and skills a further 8. But which of these are most important? We'd all recognize that these skills are desirable, but which ones are most important to be an effective leader? Well, that's an empirical question. That's one that has to be researched. And that makes it more difficult because we're collecting evidence, and sometimes the evidence may contradict, or the methodology may be flawed. There are issues about the research procedure itself, and so on. So we can't be too definitive about the desirable traits. And even if we found that certain traits emerged all the time, does that mean they'll emerge in the future? Not necessarily. The future is unknowable, according to Friedrich von Hayek, the great economist. We don't know what the future is going to hold. So if we determine that all great leaders are tall and have brown eyes or blue eyes or whatever, does that mean in the future all great leaders will be tall and have brown eyes or blue eyes? It doesn't mean that. The future is different. The future can be a different set of personalities. And we see this around us all the time. We see leaders with different characteristics emerging all the time. So this empirical question, which of these skills is most important, or which of these traits are most desirable, that is a research question, and it's difficult to answer that. McCall and Lombardo in 1983, they consider 4 primary traits to try and cut down the number by which leaders could succeed or fail. Now, this means going back to our list of traits and just cutting it down to 4. And what they consider to be important was emotional stability. So the leaders should be emotionally stable. They should be capable of admitting when they make mistakes. Don't waste time trying to justify a mistake or trying to find an excuse. Admit it and move on. They should have good interpersonal skills. They should be able to link to people and relate to people, understand people and motivate people. And they should have an intellectual ability which is required for the job. They should understand the wider environmental influences, the organizational issues. They should understand the customers. They should understand the workers. And they should understand how the product or the service is being produced. Now let's look at the strengths of trait theory. First of all, it's a very pleasing theory. It's one that crops up in conversation all the time. People look at a child and say, gosh, he or she is so much like his mother in the way he does things, or so much like his uncle. It's all the time in society, people are making comparisons. So it's a very pleasing theory. It's a simple explanation. Inherited characteristics. And there seems to have some sort of validity. This approach seems to be valid because it can be tested in a sense. We can, as in the case we've just looked at here, we can set out what the traits are and go out and test to see if leaders have got them, just by making observations perhaps. They don't have to be interviewed perhaps, they don't have to be in-depth primary research. It could be looking at published CVs and looking at the behavior of people in certain contexts and trying to link these together. So it could be researched. It's a subject that's suitable for empirical investigation, for practical research, in other words. And it provides a foundation for individual assessment. We can, if we know what good characteristics are, then we can look at individuals and say, well, these are highly desirable. It's highly desirable that the individual is intelligent. The individual is assertive and understanding and knowledgeable and so on. So we can have a tick box. The weaknesses of trait theory. Well, the list of traits is very long, as we saw earlier. The Stockdale list was very long. I think there was 11, we said. But in fact, research shows there's more than 100 traits. Now, the difference between some is very, very small and almost the same, but there are possibly 100 traits. So identifying traits is very, very complicated. Identifying precise traits. Identifying the important traits for effective leaders can be very difficult. Let's say in conducting the research, looking at successful leaders at the moment, what are their effective leadership qualities? What traits have they got that make them effective leaders? That's a difficult question to answer. Physiologically, people are different sizes. Some people have blue eyes and some people have brown eyes. Some people are tall, some people are not so tall. So physiologically, intellectually, well, some people may have been to the top universities and others may not have been to university. It doesn't mean one is superior to the other in terms of leadership. In fact, if we think about history in the 20th century, some people were not intellectually that qualified. And they became world leaders. Physical traits are not that important, generally speaking, within the business world. Within the business world, it's the product that sells. So the chief executive, the traits of the chief executive may not be that important. It's the product, the price of the product, customer satisfaction, after-sales service. This is what customers look to. They don't look to the colour of the eyes of the chief executive. So it may not be that important in the business world. So the theory is very complex. It's not as straightforward as we think. Trying to get a match and then trying to extrapolate what we found into the future. That's extremely complex. And given that the future is very difficult to predict, it makes it almost impossible. Now, the implications of trait theory, well, it provides relevant information in understanding leadership. It's good because we can identify characteristics of leaders. It doesn't mean that we can predict, which presumably is the purpose of a theory. The purpose of the theory is to make prediction. But at least we have an understanding of important traits. So we could make a list. The list might be very long, as I said earlier, it could be 100 different traits, but at least we've got a list. So in that sense, it may be a good thing. It applies to all organizations, all CEOs, all managing directors and departmental directors and divisional directors and so on. All of these have got traits. So this idea of looking for traits, it can be applied within organizations. Managers can use trait theory to assess their performance and make any necessary changes. Yes, and also no to this one. Yes, managers can look at themselves and look at their dominant traits, and by introspection, by looking into themselves, do some self-analysis to try and improve their own performance. And the no part of the answer is it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to be objective about ourselves. It's very difficult, even by good introspection, by thoughtful reflection on what we've done in the past and what we know about ourselves, to actually understand ourselves. Sometimes it's better to have this come from a professional outside us who can tell us about our behavior. So trait theory is an interesting approach. It just simply lists out the characteristics or the traits of individuals and tries to understand the direction of an organization based on the traits, and also tries to understand what traits are important and whether individuals have got those traits. It's very difficult to think of it being used to predict future leaders. And that's all we're going to deal with trait theory. So it doesn't advance us very far. It simply now enables us to work out, or try to work out, what are the important traits in leadership. That's all I'm going to do in this session. I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you for watching.